Hi, today we're looking at photographing dippers, which just happens to be my second favourite bird. My favourite is the lapwing, and that's simply because it's the first bird I ever identified as a child. I can remember going into the school library to look it up, and it was in the Ladybird book of British birds. So it might have even been the infant school, I don't remember, too long ago. The dipper, my second favourite, I think because of the habitat they live in, fast flowing mountain streams. And it's a bird with a lot of charisma. When it stands on a rock in the middle of the water's flowing around its legs and the dipper is dipping up and down. It's a very attractive bird to watch. I've been trying very hard these last couple of days to photograph them singing, and I've just succeeded, but the perch wasn't perfect. I'll show you that in a second. I photographed them singing in Kodachrome film many years ago, but they do start to breed very early in the year, so January, February they could start singing. And in some parts of the country they're very tame and approachable. In other places you won't get anywhere near to them without a hide. So there's places in Derbyshire, mid Wales and Devon where they're so used to people walking up and down the riverbanks you can get very close to them, and this is one of those places. So I'm going to show you a little bit of video that I've taken over the last couple of days, and then show you stills pictures I've taken in the past. I'm not having to be very careful here. The bird is very used to fly fishermen and ramblers walking up and down the riverbank, so I can move around freely. This is the perch the bird chose to sing from, and unfortunately it is spoiled a little by the chunk of metal on the side. The perch is also rocking in the water, not so steady, and I'd also prefer it if the bird was not standing on one leg. It's not the loudest of songs, especially when there is the sound of running water in the background. It's difficult to hear the bird. I'm moving upstream to see if I can avoid that piece of metal, and again the bird is oblivious to my movement. Although the dipper is ignoring me, it would probably not accept a dog walking past, even if the dog was on the lead. Birds are far more nervous of dogs than people. From this angle the metal is still showing, but if I go in slightly tighter I can avoid it. I also had two birds in a tree, and one of them was singing, but just as I got it into focus it flew off along with the second bird. Finally I got a bird out on a decent rock where it was singing. And for a brief moment I thought I might even get them mating. This was a strange sight. There were two dippers a long way from the water's edge, feeding on the grass hillside, and as I watched them I thought, if I'd have been looking at this through binoculars from a distance and they were just tiny specks, I might have suspected I was looking at ringoozles. The dippers were in the wrong habitat. Only the constant dipping up and down would have suggested dippers. Dippers do spend a lot of time close to the banks of the river amongst the tree roots, which is not a great spot for photography. They look much better on isolated rocks in the middle of the water. The video footage was taken with the Panasonic G9, which I do prefer to use for video. The autofocus works far better than my Olympus Micro Four Thirds cameras in video mode. However, for stills pictures the Olympus autofocus is better, and I'm much happier using the Olympus in general, but this will largely be because I'm more used to the Olympus. I'm hoping to be using a Sony A1 with the 200 to 600 lens soon. I'm not planning on selling my Micro Four Third cameras yet. I expect Olympus to catch up with their next models, but camera technology is leaping forward in large leaps and bounds these days, and the latest Sony, Nikon and Canon cameras have made great strides forwards. I'm very keen on being able to shoot at 120 frames per second slow motion in 4K and having the autofocus work. There's been some wonderful footage posted on YouTube of ospreys and short-eared owls flying in slow motion and the autofocus keeping them sharp. My Panasonic G9 and Olympus cameras can't do that. We'll now look at a few stills pictures I've taken over the years. The first one is a scan of a slide and was taken at a 15th of a second. I know that because the Canon camera I was using had the very useful feature of recording all the exposure data for each slide. You could download this data to your computer and there was a film number that appeared on the leader of the film, so you could tie it into the data. It was the film equivalent of having EXIF data. So I spent a day photographing dippers at a variety of shutter speeds, and a few weeks later, when the slides returned from the processors, was able to see that a 15th of a second gave a pleasing blur in the water, but I would get about 25% of the dippers sharp. If I went slower than a 15th of a second, I got almost no shots of the dipper sharp. And keep in mind, when you were shooting film, every time you pressed the shutter button, you spent about 20 pennies. And you did not want to be too wasteful. That number of a 15th of a second has stayed in my head ever since, and whenever I photograph dippers I take some images like this to try and get the moving water around the rock. These are more recent pictures taken with a digital camera but at a 15th of a second. One of the problems with dippers is they like to nest in wooded rivers where the light is often poor. It can be hard to find sites where they are open with good light. Since they start nesting early in the year, it's often an advantage to photograph them in March or April before the trees are in full leaf and creating shadows. This rock was well lit, but only for about an hour in the late afternoon. This site is in the Brecon Beacons and is very open and should have good light all day. Dippers have bred here for decades, and it's very common that they will be loyal to a nesting site. They are not tame here, and you do have to use a hide, but I've photographed them on this spot over many years. But on this particular occasion I wasn't really enjoying it. It was a cold day, it was rainy and miserable, and I kept asking myself, why am I here? I've got so many pictures of dippers, why do I want more? I'm sitting there feeling cold and damp and very unhappy. But one of my many rules of wildlife photography is you've never finished. You should always stay a bit longer. And suddenly the bird on the rock stretched its wings and I hit the button at the maximum frames per second and its mate flew in. They had a brief confrontation over what I don't know, but I was glad I was there now just to get this one picture. Thanks for watching.